recording. Scary. Okay, now I'm recording myself. Frightening. Okay, so you all can keep on chatting back and forth with each other, and I will ignore that on the bottom of the screen unless you say something like, this is so boring, in which case I will certainly tune in. But here we go. If you've got any questions, you can put them down in that chat box. But if you just make a note to yourself to send me a specific email, that might be the best thing so that I can answer you by email, just so we can keep it moving for everybody. So here we go. For this particular webinar, we wanted to call it sort of a team leader tune-up, and there's a couple of things that I'm going to repeat from a workshop that I did with you all, with some of you all back in January at the Heads Conference. Not many of those things, but a couple of these quotes and graphics might look familiar to you, so I apologize for that. But these are, this is an actual quote from a team member evaluation last year that I think is a good one to start off with, and providing some real hard evidence of how important the work is that you're going to be doing to lead the teams towards this accreditation work this year. And we're joined today by both chairs and vice chairs. And so hopefully I will be able to talk to all of you, regardless of what your role will be for this fall, or this, some of you are going to be working on teams in the spring. Regardless of what your role will be, I think we will help you understand, I will help you understand what I need you to do to lead the best team. Here's some more quotes. You know, supportive environments that you are providing, helping team members feel really comfortable asking questions and answering questions, just as any good teacher in a class would do. Helping to see the school through the lens of its own mission, dropping your own lenses at the door, and helping team members staying very organized and focused to get the work done, regardless of whether you're just on a couple of day visit of an interim type or a 3-day visit of a 10-year visit. So that leads me into this screen that helps these next, I think, 3 slides that will help to demonstrate the difference between what you probably already know because you're already working in our schools, and you know for yourselves whether you're in a 10 or an interim upcoming situation. So you should be familiar with the school perspective of what it takes to get ready for a visit, but this will also remind you of what you will be doing if you are leading an interim versus a 10-year visit. You've got a much smaller report if it's an interim visit, a longer report to get through for a 10-year visit, but the same the next block there where it says doc box and published curriculum, those are required for both visits, so your team members would be getting access to the doc box and the published curriculum for review and helping them assess standards. And then for the 10-year visit, of course, we are requiring the accreditation surveys. So the results of those would be in the document box for your whole team to see. And they would also be woven into the self-study narrative report that you would receive. But if it's an interim visit, we of course don't require the accreditation surveys, though many schools are deciding to use those because, quite frankly, it's a little bit of an easy answer to required polling or intentional solicitation of input from constituents. Basically helping schools demonstrate to us at the time of an interim review that the head and board are not operating in a vacuum, but that they are seeking input from constituents of the school in making decisions. So that's the difference in those 2 visits. Now, how about the timing? Sunday to Wednesday of a 10-year, Sunday to Tuesday of an interim. I will point out, though I don't think it's going to be true this year, but we are starting to have some schools that are playing with a non-Sunday start. This has worked a couple of times in the past few years. It does provide a very different feel for the start of the visit. We had one that was an interim visit last year that started on a Wednesday and ended on a Friday, and it worked okay. Lindy, I think Collegiates was like that a few years ago, starting on a Wednesday and ending on a Friday, and it works okay. It's just very different for how you would gauge the beginning of your orientation time with your team. But I don't think that reply applies to any of your visits that you're leading this year, but it may apply down the road. So I'll mention it now. All teachers are visited on both visits. It's just with a 10-year visit, we have more time to get into the classroom than we do on an interim visit. So we really want teams to honor the great teaching that's happening in the school and get in there and validate those teachers a couple of times. You're only sending your team members, and you yourself are going in for 10 to 15 minutes. It's just a drop-in visit to get a feel for the culture and the climate of learning. In an interim visit, you're trying to visit in a very large school. Let's take a Norfolk Christian school, for example, being visited later this year. 3 campuses. You can't possibly, over the course of a couple of days, visit every teacher, but what we would want that team to do would be to see a science lesson in the lower school, a science lesson in the middle, and a science in the upper, if at all possible, so that we can kind of pull those 3 pieces together and get a flair or a feel for science instruction on all 3 levels. Um, I will say that because we've made such great strides in using Google Docs to put the reports together, that in most, if not all, smaller schools, and maybe even some large ones, if your team is of the right size, you really don't have a problem getting in to visit all teachers on an interim visit. It just might be just visiting them one time. The big thing is to just have the vice chair on the team track that visiting so that no teacher gets left out, and that no teacher is being overly visited because you're not tracking it. Okay, the third line there, visiting team explores all areas of the school's program. That's pretty obvious that you're going to be doing that and responding back in your 10-year visiting team report, those of you that are doing that type of visit this year. But if you're in an interim visit, you're really focused on major challenges and any strong recommendations that were written in the previous visiting team's report. So this ends up being much more infrastructure and major areas of standards, for example, instruction and program, maybe more larger picture curriculum areas that might have been brought to the attention of the school at the last visit. So a little bit more focused on an interim than the broader spectrum of a 10. And then I think it's important as a reminder that you are reviewing all standards on both visits. The difference, of course, is that on a 10-year visit, you're given much more data from the school to work with in the form of their report. And by simple virtue of the fact that you have an extra day on campus to explore those standards and have those conversations. For an interim visit, you have one less day, a much more focused and limited report from the school that may or may not mention, that may not mention anything about, for example, technology, but yet we have 2 technology standards that we would expect your visiting team to vote on. So what we have to do is to be really creative in our schedule for the visit to ensure that a conversation has a placeholder in the schedule to talk about those standards that might not be part of the school's report. Okay, so that's the difference in the 2 types of visits. And now let's zero in on your team. You obviously will have a larger team to work with on your 10-year visit. We're still trying to work really, really hard to keep the size of our teams at a smaller, manageable number than we may have in the past. This is, of course, helpful on schools' budgets, but it also means a little bit more writing for those team members who are covering more areas than they may have used to have covered. And then also as far as getting out to those classrooms and to those different meetings, so it's helpful to the school's budget. It works. We've seen very small teams get out and do the work of a 10-year visit. It just means they're working a little bit harder. And that means you're managing a little bit more. The good thing is that I guess about 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago, we decided to throw out the overviews for each of the instruction and program areas. And that was very, very helpful to those smaller teams because they weren't doing as much writing of overviews. Instead, we're focused just on challenges and recommendations. Your interim visiting teams mostly have 4 to 5, mostly 4 visiting team members, but again, you're not having to do as much writing and shorter visits. Your visiting team report, I'm going to show you a Google Doc of a 10-year visiting team report shortly, and so you'll see, and you're familiar with what the different sections are. If you think about the interim visiting team report, it is really simply the executive summary portion of what we use in our 10-year visiting team reports. So those of you chairing or leading a visiting team for an interim visit will still have an executive summary, a listing of the major strengths with lots of good context, a listing of major challenges, and then any strong recommendations. So you will not have any spill out into programmatic areas unless I direct you to do otherwise. We have had one visit in the past, and we'll have one coming up where we're going to ask an interim team to do a little bit more work in a curriculum area for a school, simply because they've added some grades, just one grade, or it was 2 grades that they added, and we didn't want them to have to repeat a 10-year report simply because they added 2 grades, but we asked the team to dig in to those 2 grades a little bit more, and to respond back to the school and to the accreditation committee about those grades. Okay, so those are the 2 differences, or the differences in the types of visits, what the school has to do and what you all have to do as leaders. This is data, again, going back to those evaluations from last year's team members for leaders that were helping us out last year. And the orange one, the highly helpful lines, and then you have to turn your head sideways. I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to make this graph a little bit better for you, but I think this graph is important because these are what team members thought helped them the most in doing what we asked them to do. How do we learn the most about the school? The best thing is team discussions. Well, the best way to have those good team discussions is to have those first day meetings and those individual meetings with school representatives. If you look over there on those 3 highest orange bars, and so this clearly told us from last year that it's not from reading the report, it's not from looking at the school's curriculum or website, as much as it is getting in there and face-to-face with people from the school with directed, guided questions that you help your team members ask, and then bringing all that information back together into the team's workroom and really, throwing it all out there on the table. So keep that in mind when you're planning that team conference time. Many of you will see in the schedules, for example, on Monday, you all have arrived on Sunday, you just blitz out and you're finding all kinds of information. You come back on Sunday night and you do some great recapping of the day. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm not really sure about yet. I want to go out and find that on Monday. Then you go out on Monday morning, you see carpool, you start to watch an assembly, you see classes, you go eat lunch with parents and with students, and then at 1 o'clock I bring you all back together so that you can do a little bit more, recapping and dumping of all this information that you found. So it's really important to honor that team time and make sure that everybody gets back there, and that it's not a time when people are trying to work off in small groups on reports or do their own writing or check their email. You need to really preserve that time on the schedule for team members to really be able to share the information that they've gotten. Google Docs has helped us a lot with that sharing as well, and I'll show you that in just a second when I show you what a standards review chart might look like. So again, these are 3 direct quotes from visiting team members, looking at the school through its mission, that what we do in our accreditation work is a fair and collaborative process between us and the school. And then you can't help but walk away from one of these visits learning more about your own school. I've told this story before, but I'll share it again. I've only had one chair of a visiting team who one time came back from a visit and said, Betsy, I can honestly tell you, I have not learned anything on this visit that I can take back to my own school. And I said, well, I think you're good to recognize that, but I think you're absolutely wrong, because what you did learn is that you're doing a lot of things right, in your opinion. So regardless of whether you go and pick up the coolest new app for your iPad first graders to use, you may come back with great validation that your own school's approach to strategic thinking and correlating strategic plans with financial plans is just spot on and working. So thanks for doing this work for us. And we know that just like these team members have said, team leaders take away a lot of it as well. Okay, so now a few minutes of thoughts about what to think about before the visit, and then during and after the visit. And then we'll get in and I'll show you a little Google Doc stuff, because I think that's probably on your minds as well if you aren't as familiar with how we're using that. By the way, if you would be interested in receiving this PowerPoint, I'm happy to send that to you after it's over. If you just drop me an email, I'll figure out a way to send it to you to recap. So before the visit, we've got a preliminary visit, as you know, and a document review, and then the things that you have to do to get your team ready to go. The preliminary visit is pretty self-explanatory. We send you out the information, a great checklist that really can't be fine-tuned any more than we've already fine-tuned it. If you just kind of go through it, you'll know exactly what you need to do on that. I think the most important thing to think about is that second line that says determine readiness and identify work the school must complete. I got my spacing a little bit off. Sorry, meet with the board chair is supposed to be on the next line. But, you know, you get an opportunity to sort of test drive a few of the documents and test drive a few of the standards when you have this preliminary meeting. And if, you know, the school that you're visiting is really kind of scratching their head about, well, I'm just really not sure what we're doing about board evaluation, or I'm not really happy with the way we've been addressing our library. We've got a lot of changes there, and we're not going to be ready before the team comes. We're really looking forward to hearing what the team has to say about library and our approach to it before we put the final bow on that package. And that's okay. I think it's just really important that you make sure that there's a lot of honest conversation at that preliminary visit, so that when you do get there, and even before, you prep your team for that kind of information that you've received, that they're not going in to see maybe a finished product. We're not going in as consultants. You got to lay it on the line. They either pass the standard or they don't. But at least we've opened up the conversation earlier. If it has to do, for example, about board evaluation, well, let's suppose that you're doing a preliminary visit this fall for a spring visit. Well, it seems to me like the board still has some time to wrestle with a mid-year board evaluation that's a follow-up to what they may have done, so that at least you can help the school show progress toward meeting a standard. Isn't that better to start that conversation early rather than having no progress to demonstrate? And that, quite frankly, is why we've added in the preliminary visit the meet with the board chair portion. Usually we try to just get the board chair to come for a meal with the team leaders and the head of school. Again, to talk specifically about those governance standards, to start that conversation, 6 months in front of a visit, so that the board knows what its homework is before the visiting team comes. So that's the purpose of that. And board chairs, I guess we started that about 2 years ago. Board chairs have been very, very open to those conversations. And that's been nice for us to see, because we're engaging them in VAIS accreditation early. Now, the next bullet there is the document review. First thing is to continually remind team leaders that this is not a check. I would never want you to drive to a school to sit with docs and check them off a list. The point of this is to review the documents. We know that you're going to read some more than others and some in more depth than others. But really, this is your opportunity to go beyond just the conversations that you've had at the prelim visit into the school's documentation and see if you've got a connection between what they're saying and what's on paper, and then also all the wealth of information that appears in that doc box that helps inform you about the school. That document review and your preliminary visit are really the key things that help you get ready to talk to your team for the very first time, to give them the background on the school. Not to say, yeah, they've got all their docs. Well, I'm assuming that schools are going to be ready. So it's really just to say, you know, we've reviewed the documents. We find that their financial section of the document box is a little slim. They don't have as many policies as we might expect a well-founded school to have, well-established school, I should say, at this point in their history. And so that's an area that we'd like to look a little bit more into when we have our financial review meeting. So please go into your document review with that sort of focus in mind, not checking boxes, not saying they've got it or it was missing, but more the quality of the document and what you can take from it to teach your team members in their orientation. Michael Groves is on the line, and he's going to be starting this afternoon our second virtual document review. We're excited that schools are doing this. We are seeing that it's, you know, without saying it's green, but more importantly, providing the remote access to the school's documents is really helpful in that it's going to allow Michael, for example, down in Mouth of Wilson. Go look that up on your map after the webinar if you don't know where it is. Beautiful part of Virginia. It's going to allow Michael more time to look at those documents and dig into them versus him driving to the school that he's visiting, spending some time with the documents, then getting interrupted because somebody's coming to take a lunch order. All the while he's thinking about what's happening back at school. And by the way, he's got to go drive 6 hours to get back there after this document review is over. So we're finding that the virtual document review is a great route for team leaders to take. We have had Virginia Episcopal School last year do it a certain way. They've shared that with one of my workshops last fall or the summer to teach other schools how that works. If you've got a visit coming up in the next 2 or 3 years, I would highly recommend you contacting Tommy Battle and his people down at VES to find out how they did it. The document review that Michael is going to be looking into with his team has actually been done on Google Docs. So we're starting that this afternoon, and we'll find out how that platform works for sharing the documents. But anyway, I wanted to share with you that is something that's coming down the pike. But what is most assuredly coming at you is the concept of a combined preliminary and document review visit. And there are still a few of you who have spring visits, or a few of my spring visits who have not. I haven't finished scheduling those preliminary visits, but I am encouraging more and more schools to consider a combined prelim and document review visit because it does two things. It allows you to travel one time instead of two to go and have those separate visits. Secondly, it allows you to really focus a period of time on the school versus just driving in, sort of having conversations preliminarily, and then driving back to do the document review. I'm finding that when teams go back to do the document review, it does start to feel like a document check and not a review, versus when you just kind of put your own school aside for a little bit and really focus on the school that you're visiting. So that's the reasoning behind those combined visits. It does mean that the school has to try to pull its documents together earlier, but Peggy and I can really play with you and the schools to work on our timing and we typically have these preliminary visits up to 6 months ahead, and that has been so that Peggy can have lots of lead time in putting teams together. She's gotten so good at what she's doing and working our database that, if she can just have some conversation with you sometime in that 6 month out time frame with you and the school you're visiting, she can get the information that she needs to get started on the team. Okay, the last bullet point on that page then is about prepping the team. This is going to be very obvious when I show you the Google Doc in just a second. So as far as schedule and assignments and connecting to the Google Doc, things like that, that will be very obvious to you, but it's something that you've got to get your team ready for. They've got to get acclimated to the schedule, to the Google Doc, to the assignments that you're going to be giving them on the Google Doc and all that sort of thing. We do I think a really good job of telling schools what they need to do to send out to the team members and to our office. I can't say that it always works, even though we send it out. So it just has to be a nice massage thing between you working with the school and me and Peggy and I working with the school to just try to make sure that everybody gets what they need. But one of the main things I think that helps with that is that conference call that we have with your team, or that you have with your team, about a week to maybe 2 weeks before your visit. That's the time when we can make really sure that everybody has gotten the information that they need, that they've gotten onto the Google Doc, and we know who does or does not have comfort with the Google Doc. And those conference calls take 45 minutes max. Usually we can finish in 30. We like to have those at the end of a school day because we often have teachers involved, and that helps them to get out of classes and carpool duties in order to get there. And we can do those virtually, video conferencing if you'd like, or we can just simply do good old conference calls. Those work just fine too. The vice chairs on the webinar need to pay close attention to that very last line, and that is that we depend on you to pay really good attention to anybody who's brand new on a team, to just sort of check in with them before the visit, to maybe even make sure that they've gotten the information, see what kind of questions that they have, and then also during the visit to just sort of check in with them about the writing, about how they're feeling about conversations they're having. Visiting team members who are new often are very, very anxious on those Sunday afternoons because a lot of times those meetings, as well as as good as we can set them up, there's still anxiousness on the part of the school and on the part of the visiting team member. Who's supposed to be leading those meetings. I think that's always a little bit of a mystery, and never fails that we have a visit where a team member goes in there and there's just silence because the team member is anxious and thinks that the school representatives are going to start talking, or the school representatives are so nervous and they're just waiting for the visiting team member to start asking questions. So I think that's kind of important for the vice chair to take a little bit of a role along with the team leader in helping to put all team members at ease before they go into that Sunday afternoon, but especially for the vice chair to pay close attention to the new team members so that they know the types of questions that are fair game for that afternoon, and the kinds of information that they're trying to get back from those meetings to help them with standards. Okay, so that's all you got to do to get ready for the visit. And then I've slipped a little bit into the during the visit on the very first day during that orientation time. Because we've started those conference calls a few years ago, we're really getting a lot of the orientation sort of ice-breaking stuff out of the way before we even arrive. But still, it's important, I think, for you to set the tone of collaboration from the very beginning. I've already sort of addressed that Sunday afternoon. You have that information flow that comes back to the full team from those meetings, and then the confidentiality that we have a statement that you need to get your team members to sign at the very beginning of the time together in the orientation. It's just a simple statement, and it's in your visiting team leader guide that I believe Peggy sends out, and you just need to get that signature from everybody and just ensure that they understand what they're there to do. The standards review starts on Sunday night. Oftentimes I tell schools that are preparing for their Sunday afternoon visits, Sunday afternoon meetings, that like that philosophy and mission community of the school overview, that very first big program or the meeting that the school puts on for the visiting team, I suggest that the school approach that in this way. Imagine, first of all, that those visiting team members are potential parents, and you want to tell them the mission of your school and make it sing so loudly that those parents have no questions about what your school is about. Okay? The second thing that I tell them is that I want them to then think of those visiting team members as visiting team members who are going to evaluate them on those standards in philosophy and mission and community of the school. And what they need to try to do is to consider that the visiting team members had to leave that session and go and vote on the standards right then and there. Would they get the information that they needed to place a vote? And so when they're creating their program, however they're going to do it, they need to focus on those standards. And your team members need to go into that program having just reviewed those 1 through 17 or 1 through 21 if it's a boarding school standards in philosophy and mission and community of the school. At the end, we always ask for them to leave a little time for Q&A. And so that's your team members' time to say, hey, I just didn't get anything about, culture and climate of the school, for example. Could you talk to me a little bit about, what a kid feels like mid-year here? Because I'm here in, April. And so I don't know what your culture feels like around holidays and when you come back or whatever. So you just need to help prompt your team members a little bit for the types of questions that are fair game along the visit to help them get the information they need for the standards. I'm going to show you the Google Doc in just a second that helps you track on that. I think that'll be really clear. Communication with the head and with the steering committee chair. Point person for the head is the team chair. Point person for the steering committee chair at the school is the vice chair. We ask you to meet with those two people, or in some cases it's the steering committee co-chairs. We ask you to meet with those people on a daily basis, maybe not Sunday for the steering committee. But we want you to just check in with the head and with the steering committee chair just to give them any kinds of heads up, especially important for the head of the school as far as any standards that are starting to bubble up to be in question. Probably you know that by about Monday afternoon's meeting with the head. Let's say it's a 10-year visit. It's 5 o'clock on the first full day, the Monday, and you've had Sunday night discussions with your team about standards. Monday afternoon at about 1 o'clock, you've had a time to sit down with your team, and you're really starting to have some questions about technology. Well, Monday afternoon when you meet with the head, it's time to make sure that conversation is getting started. We've read the report. We know you had some reservations. We watched some technology classes this morning. We've talked to the technology coordinator. We're really just having some questions about whether this is working for you. So that's the time to have that conversation. It's so important that you do so. Maybe not so important for the vice chair to be sharing that type of information with the steering committee chair. The purpose of the vice chair checking in with the steering committee chair on a daily basis is to let them know how the visit's going as far as the schedule and the team needs and that sort of thing. This actually is something we started a couple of years ago upon recommendation from steering committee chairs who said, good grief, we worked for 2 years in labor to have this baby, and then the baby comes and we don't even know what it looks like. So that really was a lesson to us from the schools that said, you've got this core group of steering committee people who work to throw this party and then don't even know how it goes. So that's the purpose of the vice chair, checking in with the steering committee. The exit meeting, again, you have a couple of those. One is private with the head, and then one is open, to whoever the head of the school wants to come. Just a reminder that you do not share specific information about standard votes at either of those meetings. For the head of the school, if the school has failed a standard, you definitely tell them that they failed the standard. If you have a pretty significant split vote on a standard, but it was still passed, you tell them that there was significant concern about a standard, but that it was still passed. So we don't want the head of school to have any surprises when they receive the visiting team report that has strong recommendations in it that we hope everybody understands now correlates to a failed standard. Nor do we want there to be big surprises when Sally's letter of accreditation comes that says, oh, by the way, here's a piece of paper that says you failed XYZ standard. So it's necessary for you to share that information with the head of the school, not the actual votes, just whether a standard was not passed or there was significant concern. With the school community, whoever is involved in the bigger exit meeting, our recommendation is that you don't talk about standards at all. That is an uplifting time. You're talking about the major strengths of the school that are going to be lifted right out of your executive summary. A lot of times chairs just want to read that executive summary. Many chairs involve their whole team in that exit meeting, and we think that's terrific, to let each team member share a little something from the visit, because it's really supposed to be a celebratory time. Just as you started with a celebration of the school's mission and philosophy, you're sort of ending on the same note. If the school has challenges, the school's going to know that, and I don't think that it's necessary to regurgitate those things to that broader community. But you and I can talk a little bit about on an individual basis about schools and whether it is or is not appropriate to acknowledge that we have seen the challenges that you face and how you're working hard to meet those challenges. Maybe that's not the worst thing for you to say, but we can talk about that on an individual basis at the time of the visit. And then collaborating on the report, which of course now we're all using Google Docs. I'm going to take a sip of water while you read that cartoon. I should unmute you for the laughter, but I won't. So what we're using now is Google Docs for all of our team writing and for the majority of our team planning before we even get going. You will all need to set up your own Google account, and I think the majority of you have already done that, but that's how you do it. We suggest you use a familiar email address. Some people like to separate their work for accreditation, VAIS, Google stuff from their own school stuff and set up a separate Gmail account. That's fine. Whatever you want to do, talk to your technology person if you want to think about that. The password thing is critical. We don't need to know your passwords, nor do we want to. We can't help you though if you can't remember them. So do what you need to do there. And if you need help, we're always available, Peggy or I. We use Google Docs a lot, and we've learned some tricks, things that work and things that don't work. So it's probably easier because we have such a spectrum of experience with Google Docs. If you just touch base with us one-on-one, and we can help you out with what you might have. But what I did want to take time to do, and I've got about 5 minutes to do this, and that's perfect, is to show you a couple of demos. The first one is a standards review, and when it's time for your visit, and some of you have already been getting these from me, I'll be sending you 3 Google Docs to manage. One is a standards review template. One is a visiting team report template, and one is the schedule for the visit. We can all collaborate together on the schedule with the school. These other 2 documents, the standards review and the visiting team report, are closed documents. I am the owner of those documents, and the only way anybody can get to them is if I have their email address and share it with them. That's not to say that somebody couldn't copy and paste information or print it out and go make Xerox copies of it, but it's about as secure as any other route that we have found to do this kind of work, and it helps move the process along pretty significantly. So hopefully now when I click on this, it's going to work great. And you can still see my screen. Is there any way that somebody could type down there in the chat box that says, yes, I can see the demo standards review template? Hopefully you can. Yes, I think Lindia said yes. Okay, so VAIS standards for team review. What I've done is to take all of the standards and put them in a big long table. Here's the first tip we've learned about Google Docs. Google Docs doesn't love tables, but I continue to use them because I like tables. Okay, so you have a document, a Google Doc that says VAIS standards for team review. This document is going to be shared. I do it right up here. I think you can probably see me moving my mouse. Can somebody tell me if you can see me moving my mouse around on the screen? Beautiful. So the way you share the Google Doc is I click on that share button, brings up a screen, and this is where I would type in the email address for only the people that I want to have that. You can see this right here. Only the owner can change the permissions. I have set up this to be a very secure document so that nobody's going to be able to see this standards record and this conversation about standards except for the people I have invited. And in the end, I'm going to uninvite all of them. They're going to lose access to this document. I'll keep it only until after the decision is over. Okay? I'm not going to show you any more of how to share. I really want to show you how we're using this now effectively. Everybody, when they get on the team, gets access to this document. I would strongly encourage you, once you start getting on the team and even go off for your document review, to start modeling how to use this document. And I've put some dummy information in here. You can click anywhere in that table. Sunday night, you have this one open on all of your team members' screens, or if you still want to use an LCD projector and just have one person recording, we'll do that. So this is up on the screen. Here's the standard over here, the number, and you know, they've seen this whole presentation in the afternoon. Does everybody feel comfortable? Are you ready to vote on this one? Yes, type it in there. Well, then guess what? Monday afternoon, when you come back together for that 1 o'clock check-in, you've already gone through standards 1 and 2 because you decided on Sunday night you felt pretty comfortable with those. But standard 3, look here, on Sunday night, Susie Q team member had gone into the document box and she could not find the mission of the school listed anywhere in the admission brochure. So what we recorded there was, we need some more information. We need to go find out if we've got the latest version of the mission statement. You know, is one in the press, it's coming out, whatever. Is the fact that the mission is not in the admission brochure enough to fail the standard? No, but it's certainly worth talking about. Okay, so you can see it's terrific. And here's a great example. This standard 5, my favorite. You've probably heard me talk about this one before. You know, there's the school is engaged in ongoing, well understood and effective evaluation and improvement. And here we have Timmy team member who got this document well in advance of the visit, and he's already started kind of going through here going, I don't even know what this standard means. What am I supposed to be looking for here? And I actually had a team member write that last year, so that's certainly not not out of the question comment for a team member to make. Well, here, Olga, team leader, has written, here's what you need to go out and look for. So it's a great way that Timmy, the team member, can communicate to the team, hey, I don't know what this means, or I saw this. If you scroll, I have to scroll, don't I? You look at the next one, climate and culture of the school. So Helmut, team member, has said, I was out at Carpool this morning and I was talking to parents, and they are saying that kids are arriving ready to learn and they're doing all these hands-on experiments today. This school says it's all about experiential learning. I felt that in the climate and the culture, even in the Carpool line this morning. And so then somebody else can come in. You know, I agree. I saw that too. So you see, this can become a really good way for team members to communicate when they're going off in so many different directions during the visit for meetings and classroom observations. I think Ruth Murphy is on, and she was one of the early adopters of Google Docs for visiting teams, and she had her team use different colors, and that seemed to be a pretty effective thing. So that's why I've demonstrated that. Here, you might just ask each team member to choose a certain color, And then we always know, what's going on with different team members. You can track on it. And then, of course, when Jacques, and all that's done, I can certainly take that and take it all out. I can delete all those comments so you end up with a clean document. Okay, so that is a standards review template. And while I'm in this screen, I can click right over here. Now, this is an actual visiting team report template. It happens to be for St. Michael's, where Tom Thomas is the chair, and Tom is on our phone call right here. And this is what I will create and send to you. And again, just like we can see in the share button, see all of these different people have been shared the document. And I have allowed all of these different people to edit the document. And at the end of the visit, I will X them out and they will no longer have access to it. It is still a document that says only the owner can change the permissions. So the only way somebody's going to get into this is if I give them access to it. And that's really important because we don't want anybody messing with the document except us. This is the place where we will put up information about the team conference call. There's the information for how to join the conference call. And I just moved it. Sorry, Tom. And then you'll see that we've got it pretty spelled out. We've learned how to do this over the last couple of years. First thing we want people to do is to log on and tell us that they're here. They found the document. They know how to type on it. Tom Thomas was the first one to model the information. Tom, you still have 3 people who aren't on the Google Doc yet, and we need to figure out what's the problem, what's the holdup. They may have come over to it, but they haven't signed in, so we wouldn't have any idea. Tom can tell before his team even starts that before his visit even happens, that he's got a couple of people who have great Google Doc experience. Denise has told us that. Corey has told us that. So that's cool to get that information ahead of time because not everybody on the team is going to know much about it. Next thing we've done is to put your team list, your information right there. Peggy has figured out that this is the best way to get the updates to that. And sure enough, Beth Chase has written she very rarely checks her home number, so we know that we are going to check her cell phone. Okay, so this is kind of cool. Now we scroll on down in this document. We add to you a link to the school's website, so you'll be able to click on that and go to it. Tom, easy access to our accreditation materials. Tom can figure out whether he needs to pack socks or not to come to this visit. There's dictionary and thesaurus. It's all right there. Those of you who did visits last year might notice there is a new section here where I have included the school's mission. And I've done that to help get everybody really focused on why are we here, verifying the school's mission. Now, here's the team assignment chart. This is where everybody is going to find out what they're supposed to focus on. We used to send this out as a document separately by email. Now we've just put it right there on the main document that they're going to be working with so that they'll understand what they've got to focus on. So this report area, I can't highlight just one column, but this first column here, report area, comes straight from the St. Michael's self-study. So we just typed all that in. This next little column where it says O, C, and R, this just indicates that we're expecting you to write an overview and that you'll include commendations and recommendations, okay? And then I've gone through and helped Tom and Sue Scarborough, his vice chair, make the primary writing assignments and the secondary writing assignments. So we've got teams of 2 for each one of these areas. The primary person and a secondary person to back them up, to find information, and to be sort of the first editor. This section, status, is so important because just like on the standards page, this is how team members can communicate. Denise can tell Tom, when Tom is off on all these different meetings, Denise can type there in that status, Tom, I'm ready for you to read this. Or, Tom, could you check on whatever? So it's just a great, tool to use to communicate rather than, trying to find Tom to talk about it or leaving him a Post-it note or something like that. And then Tom and Sue have some homework to do before the team meets for the first time. They've got to come into this last column and decide when each one of those reports is going to be due. And so Tom and Sue will fill in, Monday night, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night, whatever. And that way those team members will know what they've got to do and when. Now, one critical thing here is that we now also suggest that you have an overall editor of the report. So if you look here on the screen, I've reorganized this information that up at the top was according to the area of the school and who the primary and secondary writers are. And now what I've done is to put the information by team member. So Tom knows his primary responsibilities here and his secondary responsibilities. I've also helped Tom and Sue decide that this gal, Jill Bifus, is going to be their overall report editor. So the deal there for everybody on a 10-year visit is that instead of having your whole team do the wordsmithing on the report, you need to assign an overall editor that's going to be the grammarian on the team that will decide whether you're using semicolons appropriately or whether you're capitalizing school or not. And she or he is going to be the person that fine comb tooth, whatever I'm trying to say, fine checks the document to make sure that that kind of detail is taken care of instead of the whole team doing it. And the overall report editor is really somebody who could use this status section effectively. So Sue and Denise here are going to be responsible for writing philosophy and mission. Sue's going to say, Denise, check this over. Denise is going to check it over. And then Sue can change this column to say, report editor Jill, we are totally ready for you to, check this out before it goes up in front of the whole group. Lindy, great question, has asked me, is this report the same for both interim visits, interim and tenure? What if I scroll on down, you'll see that that's where the report actually starts here with the title page, the visiting team, the disclaimer, the review process. All this is the same. We get here, we've got the executive summary. This is the very boring template that we have in the leader guide. Can I tell you that I and the accreditation committee are tired of reading these same ones? So if you can really make this your own, we'd be so happy with you. Lindy, this is all the same for the 10-year visit and for the interim visit. See, here's where the major strengths of the school and the major challenges show up. And then the interim visit stops right there before you get into all these other sections. You see, Tom has put in all of the sections. He's ready for his team to come in and start typing. Whoever is in charge of visual arts and music, there you go. They're ready to start typing their commendations and their recommendations. So let me see real quickly. Chris Burns has said, who decides who the primary writer is and the secondary writers will be? That can be, I can help you with that for sure. If you want to go for it, you can do it. Lots of team leaders want to put that on me, and I'm fine to do that. But I don't ever have the final say. You really need to look over my shoulder for sure. But Peggy and I can definitely look through people's resumes and background information and make suggestions. That's pretty much what I did for Tom on this one. It started school. It's busy. It's hard for Tom to find time to think about this kind of stuff right now. So I did it, threw it out there for him, and then he approved it before we sent it out to the team. So I hope that helps you, Chris. Happy to help you, but if you want to take it and run with it, you can too. You're welcome. And so the last thing that I want to make sure that I say regarding these major strengths and challenges, I cannot explain or express to you how important the context is for these. I was looking at a report just the other day. A major challenge was written to the school. This particular school is getting ready for an interim visit. And the major challenge for the school was to increase diversity. And I think the major challenge simply said, it was something as simple as explore ways to increase diversity. Well, here we are 5 years later, and that school is preparing for its interim visit. How do they know where to start? And how does the visiting team know what to do with that? I have no idea what diversity they were talking about. I have no idea what that school looked like 5 years ago. Were they talking about faculty? Were they talking about kids? Were they talking about board? It just worked 5 years ago because we weren't as far along down the pike with our interim visits as we are now. But you've just absolutely got to put the context in to paint the picture of what the school looks like right now when you're seeing them this year, so that 5 years from now, when you've got new team members coming in and looking at this, they'll get it. And what if that head of school's not there in 5 years? I just was taking some information to a head of school change a couple of weeks ago, and took them a record of all of the reports that they have had over the tenure of their time with VAIS. Brand new head, doesn't have access to that older head's brain to know what was going on those different visits. And so you've just got to do some really clear writing, especially in these major strengths and challenges, so that you paint the picture. And I'll let you know that what happens is that during the first 5 years that I was with VAIS, I was going on almost every visit for almost the full amount of time. This is the beginning of year 8. I'm not traveling quite as much to all of those visits for that extended period of time anymore, unless you're a first-time chair or unless it's a first visit to a school. But what I do is to look in on these documents during the visit and make some comments to you on it. And I think what you'll find is that the majority of the comments I make are in this executive summary in these strengths and challenges, because I'm going to push you to really give me the context. Michael Groves chaired a team last year, and they had a great visit and were finished with their report. It was a 10-year visit, and they were completely finished with the report before they went to dinner on Tuesday night. And Michael called me and said, "We're ready. You look at the report. We're going to dinner. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning." So that was great, because I sat at home in my living room and I read the report and I marked it up, commented all over it. Michael told me that next morning the team got together on the last morning of the visit. They opened up the doc and here's Betsy's red pen all over it. Well, I've got to change my color. I don't want to insult anybody this year. I won't do that again. But, here are all these questions all over the place that say, what does this mean? How did you figure this out? What led you to this, to make this recommendation to the school? And Michael tells me that a couple of his team members were a little insulted. I think he even told me, "But she wasn't even here." Well, of course she doesn't know. Well, that's the whole point. You've got to make sure that your team is writing a report that stands on its own, so that the school is not scratching its head once your team is driven off into the sunset saying, "What were they talking about? And where did that recommendation come from?" So there's a good thing. It's actually works out well for me to sort of swoop in at the end and not have been so engaged with the day-to-day of your visit, and come in at the end and kind of say, "Let's make sure this stands on its own." So that's how Google Doc works. I think that pretty much is everywhere I was going to go with this, how I was going to talk about Google Docs. And I obviously didn't plan enough time, but y'all are still sticking with me. Once the visit's over, we do have a process for how the report gets turned around. And I think you're all pretty familiar with what we do with the reader. There's a big difference between the cover letter and the executive summary of a report. The executive summary is the most important document. The cover letter is just a sweet little thank you for all the hospitality. Here's your report. Here's what you do. There's a template in your leader guide. Just change the name and put your John Hancock on it, and you're done with the cover letter. So I just wanted to make that point. Your standards vote has to be sent to Peggy and the reader immediately following the visit, so that we'll be able to have that information to guide what happens next. And when you call into the accreditation committee to report on your visit, you need to be prepared to really give the background on your team's review of standards, what led you to think one way or another, and even more background on the major challenges that might not have been included in the report. We're not asking for you to share information that you may have decided to share with just the head of school about personnel or anything like that, if you chose to do that, but just anything that's going to really help the accreditation committee get a good handle on the school and the challenges that it faces, so that it will have in its mind where to take the school over the next year to 5 years. hard to think about what's going to happen after the visit before you've even gotten there. But ultimately, you might have seen this picture before. This is from one of the schools during a visit. We saw this. I saw this on a calendar in the middle of a middle school hallway, where the kids obviously knew the importance of a VAIS visit, because what they needed to do was just be good and smile. And so we want you to do the same thing. We want you to lean on me and Peggy for sure. I hope you've got my cell phone handy. I always have that. I do work in the night. And you are always welcome to email me or use my cell phone number as a primary means of contacting me to help you out on anything. And I really appreciate you joining me today. I'm sorry I went 15 minutes over, but now you can go and grab your sandwich and enjoy. And I will be happy to, I think at this point, unmute everybody if I can figure out how to do that. And if you have any specific questions, happy to do that, or you can just sign off. Hello, Michael. Hey, Michael. Can you hear me? Michael, can you hear me? I'm trying to. Hey, Michael, can you hear me? I don't hear you. Did you unmute him? I did unmute him. Hey, Mike, do you have a microphone on your computer that you need? Obviously, you can't hear me. He's a good chatter, though. Why don't we just hang up on this and ring me up on my cell phone, okay? Groovy. See ya. Okay, we need to 15 minutes over. Darn it. You need to take the recording off.
Why?
Well, we're not recording anymore. I'm ready to stop the meeting.
Well,
I just stop it?
Just hit the red
and
button.
And the recording will be preserved?